Good morning, EdCamp Global. I'm Mark Lowndy, and this is Makerspaces, why and how, in that order, because why is actually a lot more important than how. Whether you create a makerspace, by the way, our makerspace is called Create for Construction Resource Engineering Technology Environment. No, we didn't put the "and" in. Actually, we did put the "and" in. Anyway, that's our makerspace, and I'll be showing our makerspace such as it is, because it's kind of messy right now. We're still preparing for the students to come back in a couple of weeks, so I'll be showing that to you, but a little bit later in the Hangout. By the way, I want to encourage all of you to please post questions, comments. I am watching that right here on my screen, and I will be responding to those. I want to tell you a little bit about how our makerspace and the concept of makerspaces came to be here at DeVargas. And it was about, let's see, early 2013, we had started the process of getting rid of our computer lab, which makes total sense now, but at the time, computer labs were the thing. I like to refer to them as pencil rooms, a special place you go just to use a pencil as a tool. Seems kind of silly, but that's the way most schools handled it, because computers were so expensive back in the day. They're still kind of expensive, but a lot more accessible now, particularly with the advent of tools such as Chromebooks. But anyway, we had just gotten permission to disperse our computer lab, put all the computers in the classrooms, and create a flexible learning space, which we call the think tank. So I walked into my principal's office, Jennifer Tyson, who is the best boss in the world. She hates being called the boss. I walked into her office, sat down, and said, "Have you ever heard of the maker movement?" And she said, "No, tell me about it." And that was the start of our journey. I had encountered the maker movement a couple of years earlier when I went to the Bay Area Maker Fair with my son, who was trying to get him some volunteer hours for high school. And so I went with him and volunteered too. And my impression of makers at the time was, these are people who probably lived in the woods in a tent, made pottery, and grew all their own food. Now, I suppose there are some makers who are like that, but that it was a bit of a misconception on my part. Since then, I've come to know that makers are basically people who want to own their environment. They want to own the things that they use. They want to make as little of an impact upon the environment as possible by making their own stuff. And they just like the concept of design and just making their own things. Our original concept for our maker space was just a little corner of the flexible learning room. We were going to set aside a little corner, maybe like a fold-out, movable piece of furniture that contained some making stuff. And in hindsight, that seems, it would have been overwhelmed almost immediately. Nobody would have been able to get to it. There would have been so much demand for it. At the same time, one of our special ed rooms was being changed, and a room became available. And I said, "Hey, maybe we could put our makerspace there." And Jennifer agreed, and so we decided to do that in this very room. So I started researching and looking around at how other people had instituted makerspaces, and we did it. It took us a number of months. The district was kind enough. By the way, we are a Title I school. The district was kind enough to give us some additional funding to obtain some tools and materials. We were able to get a laser cutter and a 3D printer. By the way, you don't need either one to have a makerspace. Places such as Lighthouse Charter School over in Oakland and Castilleja Girls School up in Palo Alto were kind enough to allow me to tour their sites and learn how they had approached creating makerspaces. That's one of the things about makers and about people who run makerspaces is I have found them to be extraordinarily generous and giving of their time and of the, allowing other people to come in and look at their facilities, because they know we're all pretty much in the same boat. We're all trying to create a lot of the same things for the same reason. The reason is pedagogy. That word. The reason is we're trying to teach students better. We're trying to do a better job at teaching than we have been able to do in the past. It's all about pedagogy. It's all about the goals that you want to achieve with your students. While we were making our switch from our computer lab to our flexible learning area, we were also making a more fundamental change in the school. DeVargas used to be what we call an ELD school, English Language Delayed. It's called different things in different parts of the country, but we were an ELD specialty school. There were some changes at the district level, and they decided to disperse ELD resources throughout the district. So we were sort of left with a mission that wasn't filled. Jennifer and I had had conversations, sort of blue sky conversations before this, saying, you know, gosh, wouldn't it be nice to be a STEM school? Yeah, it sure would be. All of a sudden, Jennifer was faced with the opportunity to do just that. And I'm guessing that the conversation with our superintendent was something like, hey, what would you like to do? Before our superintendent got the question out of her mouth, Jennifer was probably saying, STEM, we want to be a STEM school. At least that's the way I imagine the conversation. So we embarked on a 3-year process of pivoting from ELD to STEM. That's a big deal because there's a lot of training and a lot of practice and a lot of experience that goes into running an ELD school. Teachers have a very specific background. They have a very specific way of approaching things. And all of a sudden, we were asking them to do something very different. From STEM and project-based learning and a makerspace. And so we started that process 3 years ago. We're in our 3rd year now, and it's really been an amazing thing. Our teachers jumped in with both feet. We have an amazing staff here, but we are fortunate to have very good morale here, very progressive teachers, very open to change. And that's really the important part. You don't need to know everything. You just need to know that you can learn anything. I like to say that all of DeVargas is a makerspace, and it's really true. Create, the makerspace here is a school resource, much like a library. Teachers can schedule it. There's a Google Calendar to reserve Create. Teachers come in here to do special projects that maybe they just need to spread out a little more than they can in their classrooms. And they can arrange to have me present or not, depends on what their preferences are. And not only is the whole school a makerspace, the whole school is now a maker lab because we spread all the computers out to the classrooms where they belong. We've also acquired a lot more devices. We have a lot of iPads. We have a lot of MacBooks, and we're starting to dip our toes into Chromebooks. I'm a late believer in Chromebooks. There's a lot of bang for the buck. I'd say 90 to 95% of what we and our students do in the classroom can be done on a Chromebook. Exceptions would be any kind of local storage because they don't really have very large hard drives. Video editing is the tools aren't quite there for the Chromebooks, although you got to figure somebody's working on that as well. So the whole school's a makerspace. The whole school is a computer lab. I'd like to show you Create. Let me unplug here. Now I want to apologize in advance. I want to apologize especially to my principal, to Jennifer, because she doesn't like showing messy things. She believes in a clean desk. However, makerspaces are inherently messy, and we are still preparing for the students. So we have a lot of things stored around here, so be prepared for a big mess. One of the things that we're working on with the students is some cubbies. Let me actually come out here, see if there's enough light here to see it. Yeah, looks like we got it. This is some cubbies that are in the process of being made, and they're going to go just outside the door in this spot right here. So they'll sit on the floor just over here, just outside the door. And that is one of the biggest challenges for any makerspace is storage. We're currently storing in progress projects in these sliding closet doors in banker boxes. So students who are working, I think there's still a few that need to be cleared out for this school year. But that's all of it. When you start a makerspace, all of a sudden you have projects going, and then where do they go until they're finished? That's a big challenge. Where do you keep raw materials? It's a big challenge. I don't have the answer. I lust for one of those big storage pods that we can keep raw materials, particularly long stock like boards and PVC pipe in. I just don't have any place to keep it here in a makerspace. I showed you one of our workbenches a little earlier. And by the way, all these boxes here are going into a different room. We were sharing this space with our fabulous art teacher. And I've always thought that art and making totally overlapped. And our art teacher was totally, it's a good word, totally, really understood making. And we worked well in this room, but there was still a bit of a conflict in trying to schedule the room for both purposes. Anyway, this is one of our workbenches, and even though I'm running a makerspace, I am not Mr. Handy. I'm not that guy next door with all the tools and the amazing workbench in his garage. I did this because I thought that I really believed in the ability of everybody to learn, and I had to drink the Kool-Aid too. So I found some plans for a workbench online, and I can cut a board, I can measure a board, and I can drive a screw. That's really all it took. All I had to do is follow the directions. And if I can do it, the kids can do it, which is why the cubbies are being worked on by not just me, but our Mouse Squatters, which is our tech club on campus. The kids were building it. That's kind of a really interesting story, in that when we started working on the cubbies with the kids, these are 3rd to 5th graders, mostly 4th and 5th graders. When we started working on the project with the kids, we went through the whole design cycle. We started off with the plans for the cubbies, and then we prototyped in cardboard. And I learned something very interesting. They made them flat instead of, because they didn't understand that in a plan, even though the numbers were there, even they didn't understand the z-axis, that the plans had depth. So as a way of illustrating what it was we were trying to build, and get the kids' minds wrapped around the process of following a plan, I created the cubbies, sort of like a cartoon version of the cubbies in 3D. Now, I didn't just print this all out in one piece. I actually printed out each individual shelf, made grooves in the uprights so that the shelves fit into it, so that the kids could see how the whole thing was constructed. And there's a video about it on my blog, actually, an ongoing video, but there's one part where you actually see the kids talking about how they're reproducing what there was. So I was very, very fortunate to have the 3D printer. If I didn't, I'm not quite sure how I would have approached it. I might have built something to. This would have been the best way to do it. I might have built a cardboard prototype of my own. But after we modeled it in 3D, then they started practicing their cutting and routing techniques on scrap wood, because we'd gotten our PTA, we call it our home and school club, we call it the HSC here, our parents group, to fund the purchase of the lumber, and I didn't want to ruin the lumber before the kids actually learn how to do what we needed to do. So that's an ongoing project. We're going to finish that up this coming school year. So let me go on and show you the room. Our room, this used to be a what we call a wet room. So it has actually 3 sinks in it, but it also has an oven and a stove, which is really cool. By the way, that locks out. They can't turn it on without a key. It's actually kind of a pain to turn on, so it's very safe. You don't need to have any special materials to have a makerspace. You need a space, and every school has that. They're called classrooms. You don't need any special materials. You can start making stuff with just junk, recycling stuff, things that you might throw away. I've saved things like the cottage cheese container I eat every morning for my breakfast. We had hundreds of them. And there have been some interesting projects made out of them. These are anybody know what these are? This is the packaging material from iPads. They come in boxes of 10, and that's the packaging material. And those sorts of things, packaging material from iPads, laptop computers, things like that, have been extremely popular for building materials. Our laptops came with little corners. They're triangle-shaped things, and the kids used the heck out of those when they were. Yeah, it got a little dark there. Anyway, they used the heck out of those when they were working on a project for where they were doing. They were presented with the question of how can we mitigate the traffic and crowd control problems at Levi Stadium. And we're talking about second graders. They were given that question. They actually had representatives of the stadium come in and visit. So they talked about the specific problems. They designed, they wrote, they built models of their ideas. Some of them were amazing. Some of them were wildly economically unfeasible, but still would have been really great. In other words, to put an entire transit center underneath the stadium, which would have cost billions of dollars, but boy, it would have been great if they could do that. And they used tubes to illustrate the subway. Remember, your second graders? And then we had a big assembly where all the projects were displayed, and they did videos. So there was were an enormous number of standards and educational, what I call silos, that were hit just in this one project. Which is why I'm a huge believer in project-based learning, because it breaks down the silos between educational disciplines. One project can include math, history, literacy, all in one project. And so in that sense, it's a natural for an elementary school. But even at a middle school or a high school, if teachers team up, if teachers work together, if they understand the flow of the project and they can cooperate in designing their curriculum, in designing their projects, and understand that when a student comes to me from his history class to my math class, that he'll be working on something in particular, and I'll understand that he's moving through mathematical challenges that he has to learn, and I'll understand what sort of support that that I would be providing to the student. So project-based learning, awesome, awesome. Okay, a little bit more tour. We also have a refrigerator over there. I actually don't keep my lunch in it, but I could if I wanted to. But we could keep temperature-sensitive materials in it. But speaking of materials, here's some of the things we use. These are just shoe boxes. And I know some of you are going to absolutely die for this, and I don't mean in a good way. Math manipulatives. We're drowning in math manipulatives, so I bring them in here and we use them as consumables. Math manipulatives used as consumables. let's see. We do have some Makeys up here. And if you're not familiar, this is actually the Makey board in the bottom of a berry container. I wanted to make something transparent that we could keep all the components in, so you can see the actual Makey board, which is this white thing with the pattern on it, and its associated cables and wires. This is basically our whole electrical area. So we have batteries, soldering irons. Yes, we do let elementary school kids solder. And that brings up a point. The most important thing in this room is safety. And when I orient the kids to the room, I asked them the same question. What's the most important thing in this room? And some of them are pretty wise, and they'll say safety. And I'll say, no, the most important thing in this room are you and me. And keeping us safe is just the way we make sure that you and me go home the same way we came to school in the morning. So every single student, every single class is required to go through safety briefing every year. I've got 7 new teachers this year. All of them are going to be going through orientations here in this room, with safety being the #1 stress. We're certainly going to be talking about the educational value of the room, but safety is the most important thing. You know, our #1 charge every day is not to lose any students, right? So we try not to do that. And we've had only a very few minor cuts, hot glue gun burns, things like that. And the hot glue guns we use are the low temperature type. So even if you do burn yourself, the injuries tend to be very minor. But again, everybody is trained on the importance of safety. And I make a distinction to the students in the room. I'll tell them, you know how sometimes if someone misbehaves in your classroom, that your teacher might say, well, if you don't stop doing that, we're going to have to stay in late for recess or something like that. They'll say that there will be future consequences if the negative behavior doesn't cease. And I tell them, it's not like that in here. We don't do that. The first time there are any safety transgressions, the student is not asked, but told to leave the room, and they go visit Jennifer and have a safety chat. Let's see, in the 2 years, this will be our 3rd year, in the 2 years that we've been running the room, I've only had to send 1 student to Jennifer. So they're given the responsibility, and they've taken it and worked and run with it. I find that when you trust the students, they know that you're trusting them, and they tend to rise to the situation. So that's been a wonderful experience. The kids are always more capable than at least I've given them credit for. So let's see, do you think that they can do such and whatever it is? They're always like 3 levels higher than that. When we were planning Create, and okay, I went to the kindergarten, 1st, 2nd grade teachers and said, okay, what tools do we think will be appropriate for what grade level? And after about 90 seconds of this prearranged meeting, we're all sitting around a table. After about 90 seconds, we came to the realization that every single tool is appropriate for every single kid. The only difference is how they're going to be able to use them. For example, probably the most immediately dangerous thing I have in this room would be an electric circular saw. That's kept locked up. And when the students do use it, you're going to use it with my hands on top of their hands. So, and that's K through 5. That particular tool is treated with the utmost respect, and I am not going to give a circular saw to an elementary school student and say, just go to town. Conventional saws, though, I do. I will teach them how to use them, teach them that no one is to approach them while they're using them. Every tool has its own set of rules. All of the sharps are locked up, all of the saws, all of the box cutters, things like that are locked up. So they have to individually request those. It's actually become a bit of a joke between me and the students with the box cutters, in that every time I give them a box cutter, the first time I tell them box cutter, I'll explain to them that, you know, all the different rules of using a box cutter. The first rule of box cutter is that it's always closed, that the blade is always retracted, unless you're actually making a cut. If you need to stop for a second to scratch your nose, you close it, you scratch your nose, you open it again and resume working. So every time they ask me for a box cutter, I'll say, what's the 32nd rule of box cutter? Or what's the 17th rule of box cutter? And they have to tell me, always leave it closed. So it's fun with safety rules, but they understand it. And I don't tolerate anybody breaking that rule. If I see if I see them put a box cutter down with the blade extended, I'm on them like, in a second. That particular rule is because when you put a box cutter down, sure as shooting, someone else is going to need a box cutter and they're going to grab it by the wrong end. And I demonstrate that. I simulate demonstrating that for them, and it horrifies them, and they tend to remember. So safety. Another thing we do here is deconstruction. So somebody donated this four-head quasar VCR. So some kid is going to have fun taking that apart, and we don't let them just destroy things. Occasionally I'll have a kid ask me for a hammer, and the first thing I'll ask him is, well, what do you want with it? And if they're deconstructing something, what will happen is because these things are consumer products are, for the most part, not designed to be taken apart. That doesn't mean they can't be, but it's a challenge, and you have to really analyze them, figure out what kind of fastener has been used, what kind of tool is appropriate to remove that fastener. And that's really the valuable process of deconstruction, is analysis, thought, and then the physical techniques are really almost secondary, although important, because you're going to go on, you're going to be making and unmaking other things. So when they want a hammer, I know it's because they've run up against an intellectual challenge that they've become frustrated with, and they just want to start destroying. They just want to start banging the thing apart. And I have to make it clear to them that deconstruction is not the same thing as destruction. This is a school. We want them to learn things. The playground is the place to get your to get your frustrations out. One of the other things that we do in here is there's that overlap between making and art, because kids are going to want to decorate what they got. So we do have watercolors, markers, brushes. You cannot have enough masking tape or duct tape. Oh my goodness. Oh, another thing we're doing here, we're going to be building a Lego wall. I found out that these things cost about 10 bucks a piece, and I needed 80 some odd ones, and I didn't have that much in my wallet. So we did a donor's choose, my first donor's choose, and we got some really great donations in the first couple of weeks, and then all of a sudden I found that it was zeroed out. Some mysterious unknown person had come and completely funded our Lego wall. So we're looking forward to getting those tiles in the next month or so. But I found out, and this is a valuable thing for those of you who might be using Donors Choose, is that apparently there are some very well-to-do people out there who dip into Donors Choose, look around, find projects that they like, and then fund them. These are projects that all of a sudden they're 100% funded by, at least in our case, an anonymous person. We have no idea who it was. Her name, I can't remember what her name was, like San Jose Joanne or something like that. I have no way of tracking her down. I have no way of thanking her directly, personally, which I would love to do. Donors Choose, however, does provide a thanking pipeline that you can do. I know it'll get back to her, but golly, we'd like to have her out here to see it, to be here for the inauguration. Heck, I'd even put her name on it. So Donors Choose could be a really good thing. And there's apparently a whole sort of a gamification of Donors Choose. There's the right time to put your project up on Donors Choose. I'm guessing towards the end of the year when income tax starts becoming an issue for donations. Describe some of the things that I've been doing over the summer, because there is a lot of really great professional development out there for free. If you are a teacher, and even if you are not a teacher, well, because I am not a certificated teacher. I'm an instructional technology specialist, and my primary background is as a journalist, which in a way has freed me from some of the deeply learned habits and practices that teachers have to often unlearn when they start innovating in education. Some of the things that we're discovering that are effective are go exactly counter to what teachers have been taught, and what and the policies that schools and school districts have established over the decades, because our current traditional educational system is over 100 years old. If you look at a picture of a turn of the century classroom, with the exception of the lighting and the materials that the desks are made out of, it's still students sitting in rows with the teacher standing in front. So we're starting to change that, and a makerspace is just a small part of that. When you're trying to reach out and learn the things that you don't know, I mean, you've got things like EdCamp Global, which we're doing right now, and you've got people like myself who are so grateful for the things that they've learned from others in the profession. That we want to give back. I want to give back. I truly enjoy this. I just came from 2 EdCamps. I was up in Redding, California, which is a 4-hour drive from where I am right now. Came back last night. I was there for 2 days as the lead facilitator for the EdCamp at the California Teachers Summit. And being part of that, being part of an EdCamp is just an extraordinary experience. I strongly recommend that you Google EdCamp, find an EdCamp near you, and go participate in an EdCamp. If you have never been to one, EdCamps are unconferences, meaning a traditional conference, you go and there's a calendar and a list of all sorts of events, set topics with set speakers, and you go and you sit and you watch them speak, much like we're doing now. Ironically, even though this is called EdCamp, when you do it in this format, it tends to be a little bit more of the traditional presentation. In other words, me sitting here in front of the camera and you sitting there in front of your computers listening to me talk. In an EdCamp session, the EdCamp attendees will have selected the topics themselves. When they arrive at EdCamp in the morning, they'll grab a Post-it and they'll write their topic on it, that the ones that they would like to learn about, or something that they have to offer to other people, and stick it up on a window or a board, a whiteboard. And in our case, there were dozens and dozens of these Post-its stuck up on a window. And while everybody went into the auditorium to listen to a live speaker, I and a couple other people gathered up all of those Post-its and arranged them into a grid of 45 EdCamp sessions in 15 rooms, 3 50-minute sessions, broken up by lunch. And so then people could come out and look at the schedule, decide where they wanted to go, and they're the ones who created it. They're the ones who own it. And if we've discovered anything about education in the past number of years, it's that when a learner, a student or an adult, when a learner owns the process, they tend to be far more engaged. And that's really what makerspaces are about. It's about creating engagement. It's about creating ownership. When the students own the process, you don't have to encourage them to finish it. You're not going to be saying, well, where's your homework? They're going to be coming up to you and say, did you see my project? Did you see this thing I built? I got to show you my project. Did you see this thing I built? They're already engaged. They're already fired up. This is not just the next big thing. In 10 years, I anticipate almost every school in the country, if not the world, is going to have a makerspace, and it won't be a special thing. We won't be talking about, well, let's see, should we have a makerspace? Should we not have a makerspace? It's going to be like, should we have some place to sit? Should we have a pencil? Should we have a computer? We don't think twice about those things. Those are inherent to education. Those are ordinary things. So making is going to become, and is becoming, an ordinary thing in education. So understanding making, understanding operating a makerspace is going to be an ordinary skill in education. A makerspace, by the way, a makerspace looks an awful lot like something many of us have seen before. I went to school in LA City schools, and when I was in middle school, we had industrial arts. We had shop class. We had an electric shop, a wood shop, a metal shop, and a print shop. I went back to visit my old middle school. It's now a middle school. It was a junior high school when I attended it. But I went back and visited about 5 years ago. And the building is, the industrial arts building is still there. And it still says industrial arts on the outside of it. But all of the rooms are just used for storage now. They completely killed the industrial arts programs. So those practical skills are gone from education there. However, what we've done in a makerspace for education in the sort of a reboot isn't to reproduce that old shop industrial arts model. Back then, industrial arts, well, all the boys, by the way, it was almost exclusively boys. Boys took shop, girls took home ec. I wanted to take home ec because I love to cook. But anyway, it was completely split up by gender lines. At least in my experience, when I was at school, there were no exceptions. There were no boys who took home ec, and there were no girls who took shop. But we're not rebuilding that. We're not back in those days. Industrial arts was for the kids who were not academically inclined. They were for the non-book learners, and those kids were looked down upon by the educational system. In a sense, they were being shuffled off to an alternate path where they would become mechanics or technicians or print, and they would be working with their hands, which is something that is not and has not been valued in the United States for many years. That if we don't work with our minds, that we are valued at a lower level and considered at a lower level in society. We don't do that anymore. Not with a makerspace. The makerspace is, sure, you learn all the mechanical, physical things, but you're doing it for a different reason. You're doing it as an integrated part of the whole educational experience. The makerspace is no longer an alternate pathway. It can be the start of an alternate pathway for students who are moving in that direction because they want to, but not because they've been abandoned by the system. We don't abandon kids. We try to meet them where they are according to their style of learning. And when you approach pedagogy with project-based learning, you're putting a seat at the table for everybody. You're putting a seat at the table for the kid who's the organizer. You're putting a seat at the table for the kid who actually does like to work with their hands, the kid who's creative and understands color, the kid who's analytical. And because they're working together, because they almost always work in teams, they're sharing this knowledge and they're sharing the possibilities with each other. They are making each other better. And I find that that's the same thing when I go to EdCamp. When I sit down in a room with 4, 10, 12, 15 other educators, every single one of us knows something that the others don't. When you're sitting around in a circle and you're having a conversation, with all of those people who have things to offer that you didn't know about, that's very powerful. And it's even more powerful than, the so-called expert in front of the room. That's just one person who may know an awful lot and may be, a celebrity even, recognized as an expert in the field, but they're not going to be as knowledgeable or as powerful or be able to come from the multitude of perspectives as a room full of motivated educators. And by definition, people sitting in an EdCamp are motivated educators. So again, I can't stress looking up EdCamp enough. EdCamp Global, by definition, is global. We're doing this for 24 hours. EdCamps are typically on Saturdays, sometimes Sundays, and they also tend to be most common in the metropolitan areas. So there is a huge need for people, say in the middle of the country. If you're in Montana, one of my favorite educators that I know from social media is in Minnesota, and she has to travel a long way to get to an EdCamp and isn't able to get to very many of them. I've actually lost count in the year I've been attending EdCamps. The first one was EdCamp SF in August of last year. I've literally lost count of how many EdCamps I've attended. It's, as a non-teacher, it's allowed me to crawl inside the heads of my teachers. I'm very proprietary about my teachers because I support them, and I want to know what they're dealing with. I want to know the things that I don't experience, like dealing with parents. I don't have to deal with parents. I don't, although sometimes I do, and it's almost always in a good way. I'm sorry, teachers. So I don't have to do cumes. I don't have to do a lot of those things, but I know about those things because I've sat down and I've not only talked to my own teachers here, but I've talked to teachers at EdCamp, and I've deliberately gone into sessions that are about things that I don't know anything about and really don't need to have direct knowledge of. Like yesterday, I went into it was a session, it was for new teachers, tips and tricks. And I went in and I sort of dipped in because I couldn't really attend because I was in charge of the whole thing. But I went in for a few minutes and listened to what they had to say, asked them some questions about what their major concerns are coming into their first school year, what their fears were, because I have a few new teachers coming in to my school, and I want to know what they need from me, how I can help them, because I'm very aware of the 5-year burnout in teachers. If you're not familiar with that, there's statistics that show that there's a huge number of new teachers who last 5 years and then they get out of the business. They just burn right out. If they can get past that 5-year hurdle, they tend to stay in for the long haul. But so one of my personal aims is to get all of my teachers, all of my new teachers, past that 5 years, because gosh, folks, education's important, and you all know it. So EdCamp, I was at a leadership conference earlier in the week. It was put on by our County Office of Education. You might want to talk to your local County Office of Education. Often they have resources that they are dying to give to you that people just don't know about. Call them and ask them. Say, do you have any professional development resources that I can take advantage of? So County Office of Education or school board, depends on how your schools are organized. Use social media. If there are a ton of educators that are on Twitter, for example, I found a group of like-minded people on TOSA Chat, TOSACHAT, hashtag TOSA Chat. TOSA, if you're not familiar with the acronym, stands for Teachers on Special Assignment. Most of the time, these are coaches, and I found that these are my people. This is my tribe. So I hang out on TOSA Chat every week, Monday at 8 o'clock Pacific time. California Ed Chat fires up Sunday night at 7 Pacific time, and there's Illinois Ed Chat. There's Ed Chats all over the place. There's just tons of them. So there is an enormous amount of ad hoc professional development available on social media. You really, online, you almost can't get on there without tripping over some professional development. So even those of you who are in rural areas, in areas that don't have a whole bunch of ed camps popping up every 2 or 3 weeks, you still have the opportunity to get professional development. Okay, lacking any questions, I'm actually going to end a bit early. So this is your last chance. I'm watching the question bar. I'm looking for more. So I'm going to end right now. I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Everybody who's been dipping in and out. Those of you who've been here for the whole 50 minutes now. And I'd like to thank the folks who organized EdCamp Global, because oh my gosh, they've done an amazing job with this. I've been seeing Periscope pop-ups about every 5 minutes, it seems, with live events going on. So pop over to Periscope, follow EdCamp Global, because there's a bunch of things popping up. Go to the EdCamp Global schedule page where you found this Hangout. And I'd like to thank you all for coming, and perhaps I'll see you at some event. We'll see you later. Thanks a lot.